This week on the Afterwards podcast, a dip into our archives with primatologist and conservationist Jane Goodall. In a conversation from 2009, she discusses her book, Hope for Animals and Their World, how endangered species are being rescued from the brink. In it, she and her co-authors share inspiring stories of people and projects working to save species on the edge of extinction. Dr. Goodall died earlier last week at the age of 91.
Welcome, Jane Goodall.
Thank you.
Just to list the things that you have accomplished would probably take most of this interview, so we'll move through an abbreviated version of that. Founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, the author of groundbreaking studies of the chimpanzees that you observed, the author of several books, including Hope for Animals and Their World, which we are here to talk about today, and we might as well get to it. This book is a series of case studies, and they are case studies of species that have so far been saved from extinction. Why did you write it? Why did you choose these particular species?
I wanted to help people understand that in spite of all the doom and the gloom, and there's no question we have done so much damage to our planet, and it is right to be concerned and very concerned. But there are too many people who take this all aboard and therefore give up. They lose hope and decide it's not worth doing anything. And my crazy travel schedule, which takes me 300 days a year all over the world, has enabled me to meet some extraordinary people who've done some extraordinary things, who have become passionate about a particular species or even an ecosystem. And even when they're told there's no way that you can save this, it's too late, they won't give up. And so these are success stories, and they're deliberately selected, mostly from the people I've actually met or had introductions to. The book could be many times longer. There's more stories than this. And in fact, some of the book is on our website. The publisher said, no, you have to cut, you can't have everything. So it's chosen to give people hope, to help people understand that even though in some cases we've reached almost the end of the road with a certain species, just have some determination and some obstinacy and the courage really to withstand all those who say, oh, it's a waste of money, that the animals will die, let them die with dignity in the wild, just leave them be. They refused to listen, and they somehow found the money and the energy and saved them.
Well, you can see the passion that the people who have been working to save these animals felt for them in the names that they've given them. I was looking through and keeping track, and there are chapters about Vancouver Island marmots named Oprah Winfrey and Franklin. There are whooping cranes named Tex and George. There are peregrine falcons named Scarlet and Rhett. These are very personal issues to the people who are involved, aren't they? I mean,
absolutely. And it's interesting because, of course, when I began studying the chimpanzees, I had no idea that from the point of view of strict science, I should have given them names, not names, but numbers. And, well, I didn't know that. And it seems ridiculous to me. So the chimpanzees all had numbers, and I described their personalities and their minds and their feelings. And when I got to Cambridge University to get my PhD, I was told this was all wrong. But thinking back to my childhood teacher, I knew that the scientists were wrong, and I was right because that was my dog. And you can't have some kind of animal share your life and not understand that, of course, they have personalities, minds, and feelings. Of course, they deserve names. But even today, there are people who feel, and probably rightly, that if they start talking in these terms about their animal, they will be less eligible to get grants from certain organizations because it's too fluffy, it's too sentimental.
it's not scientific.
It's not scientific enough.
And yet, on the other hand, you might argue that giving an animal a name might be a way to get more people to invest in that animal,
well, of course
to
it
care
is.
about the future of that animal.
Of course it is. I mean, you know, sometimes writing this book, it was too confusing to write about all these numbers. I thought, well, you know, I'm lost. I've lost track of what is number 49 versus number 57. And so I gave them temporary names just for the purpose of the book. I asked the biologist if they would mind, and they said no, they wouldn't. Some cases, though, interestingly, people stop naming simply because they're reintroducing them into the wild, and they have such a high rate of loss that they feel they can't cope if they name them, so they just give them numbers.
Well, perhaps you should give some examples of some of the species that you write about in this book. I found them also interesting. Maybe you should just pick one. And did you visit all of these places or most of them? But where are some of the places you went? Some of the more memorable.
Yeah, I couldn't visit them all, but I certainly visited the whooping cranes. I visited the sanctuary in Texas, where the first flock spends the summer. I visited the Patuxent breeding center, you know, near Washington, D.C. And best of all, I went and visited Operation Migration, where Joe Duff is teaching, well, and his helpers are teaching these cranes a new migration route. I got to go up in an ultralight. And so it was, you know, totally, totally fascinating.
The whooping crane, of course, is a bird that went completely extinct in the wild. And
no.
Am I right?
The original flock was down to 27. And they were summering in the Aransas Nature Preserve in Texas. And then they nested somewhere north in Canada, but nobody knew where. And all the time the flock was getting less and less. And then one day, some helicopter pilot was spraying, or I don't know what he was doing, and he saw this white bird with golden-colored young, and that's where they were. They were nesting in Wood Buffalo Park in Canada. But this little flock was down to 27, and, you know, 2,000-mile migration, getting less and less. If bird flu or something came along, then that would be the end of that. Right. So that was why they needed to start a second group. But they had to teach them to migrate because they learned from their parents. And this was a new route. It was an ancient one, but no bird living knew it. So they trained them to follow the ultralight, like Bill Leshley trained Egyptian geese to start with.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that's how that worked. I got
mixed up with black-footed ferrets and California condors.
Black-footed ferrets extinct in the wild, California condor extinct in the wild, the pygmy rabbit extinct in the wild, so many of them.
So these were, all of these species do have in common, one thing, it seemed to me, was that they all were to the point where we could have written them off. We could have just said, forget it, let's pull the plug and go away, but it didn't happen. And some of the incredibly inventive things, such as using ultralights to teach migratory routes.
Yes. And my favorite story with one of them, with the whooping cranes, is George Archibald, who's done so much for cranes worldwide. And they had this one female, and she had genes that they really, really wanted for their captive breeding, but she'd been hand-raised, so she wouldn't mate with a crane. So George volunteered to do courtship dancing with her every day for, I think, something like a month, twice. And she did lay an egg, and they were able to artificially inseminate it. And so her genes are now all over the place. I love that story. It's one of my favorite pictures in the book.
When you first entered Tanzania, what equipment did you take with you other than a pen and a pad of paper?
We couldn't afford much. It was on a shoestring. I mean, who was going to give money for this young, untrained girl? I mean, it was crazy, wasn't it?
Yes.
And Louis Leakey just went on, and finally a wealthy American businessman, Leighton Wilkie, said, all right, money for 6 months, we'll see what happens. The British authorities in what was then a British protectorate of Tanganyika, this young girl, we will not take responsibility. And that's why I had to have a companion. And Mum volunteered, which was amazing. You know, she was there for the first 4 months. And so fortunately, before the 6 months money ran out, I'd seen tool using and tool making and hunting and sharing of food. So we were able to get more money to carry on the study. But what did I have? I had a pencil, a notebook, little notebooks that fitted in my pocket, and not very good binoculars because we couldn't afford really good ones. And that was it, and clothes.
And now
And
field
now,
biologists have the benefit, for better and sometimes arguably for worse, of incredible technologies.
yeah, well, they've got the
Tracking
radio.
devices you can put
Yes.
on a dragonfly.
Yeah,
Satellite readings of entire forests to see
That's
what the
right.
trees are.
which
are
we use a
falling.
lot.
Yeah, and that that seems to be one of the other things that the species in this book have in common, is that they have all benefited from the fact that these field biologists, in their mad race to find out more before it's too late, have actually succeeded, and have succeeded with the help of new technologies, new tools. And is that a reason for hope as well?
Well, that's a reason for hope. But you know, there are stories in this book dating back to that kind of help. So people who struggled, like some of the island birds from islands off Australia and New Zealand, for example, Mauritius and places, the early biologists didn't have access to that kind of tool. So it was a hit and miss. Let's try and hatch the eggs in incubators, and like Don Merton experimenting with the last of the black robins to try and increase the number of eggs that are laid in a year by what's now commonly done, this double or even treble clutching. You destroy a nest, you you normally put the eggs in an incubator, then the pair makes another nest, and you take those second eggs and have them hatched, and then you leave them with their third nest. But
how do I say this? The esoteric skill sets that field biologists have amaze me. The ability to sit for days on end in the blazing sun and watch a bird in a cave, to count, as one early Condor biologist, to count the number of lice that it picked off its wings in the course of a day.
I didn't read that.
I mean, were there any particular skill sets that you were impressed by in your travels?
I was absolutely impressed by some of the rock climbing ability. The story, one of the stories I love, is the rediscovery of the Lord Howe's Island stick insect, which is a stick insect like this, thought to be extinct for 80 years, and then rediscovered. And it was surviving on a pinnacle of rock, miles offshore, with only one clump of vegetation on it, not very big. It was basically one bush. And how could this leaf-eating huge insect possibly survive there for 80 years? But the team went to prove it wasn't there. And lo and behold, they found it. But they had to climb this sheer rock at night. I said, you're really making me nervous. And Nicholas Carlisle said, just to think of it gives me the wobblies. But he's done it several times. And the short-tailed albatross going out to that island, Torishima, extraordinary, so difficult to get to.
I must say, though, that there is some controversy attached to some of the techniques that have been used to bring some of these species back. There are people who argue that captive breeding programs are extremely expensive, hit and miss, and that they use up money that could be better spent on habitat or out in the field. And well, that's the way the argument goes.
Yeah, well, there's not much point saving the habitat, putting money into that if you've lost the species in the meanwhile.
Yes,
so most of these stories are kind of balanced between protection in the wild and also some captive breeding. And captive breeding, if it's done right, and if the animals have the opportunity to learn some of their skills. I think one of the big controversies was soft release versus hard release. Soft release, which to me always seemed better. You let the animal adjust slowly, he can go out and come back, you feed him, he learns the predators and things, versus hard release, where you just dump these creatures out in the middle of their environment and say, bye, good luck. And those actually don't work very well.
I have noticed, I noticed also while reading the book, or thought about the fact that you know, in the time since you began your career and the time when the most recent of these programs have been operating, you know, many of the threats have changed. New threats have arisen. Some have become less pressing, but I wonder how whether you have ideas, whether you've been coming up with strategies to deal with, for instance, the bushmeat poaching problem, the commercialization of that kind of hunting, or with, well, let's start with that. Yeah, or with climate change.
And human population growth. Those three are the things. Well, with the bushmeat, you know, it's really difficult because huge amounts of money are involved. And I think it's really important that people understand that the bushmeat trade is commercial hunting. And it's very different from the subsistence hunting that's enabled people to live in harmony for hundreds of years. And it's been made possible by foreign logging companies moving in to, well, in this case, the Congo Basin, and opening up the forests with roads. And of course, opening up forests with roads is something that is damaging anywhere. Opening up any piece of wilderness with roads is deadly for the animals living there. But in this case, it enables hunters to go from the cities to the end of the logging trail, and they're shooting everything, elephants and gorillas and chimps and antelopes and monkeys and birds and bats, anything that they can smoke, and then the trucks take it into the towns. So because so much money is being made, because politicians are sometimes involved, because there is very little political will in many cases, it's tough. And the only way that we're trying to make some headway is working with other NGOs on the ground, working with, for example, the World Bank, and working with industry like the logging companies and the miners to try and find a way to minimize this and provide other ways of livelihood for the hunters and other sources of protein for the people. Because
I have a strong theme that came out of this book was the idea that, well, well, there's a gentleman, a late gentleman, he died tragically, named Ming Sherpa, who worked for the organization that I worked for, the World Wildlife Fund, who used to always say that conservation needed to have a human face if it was to work. And I know that you're a big proponent of that. Can tell me a little bit about, can we talk about an example of how that has succeeded?
Tell you exactly how I became involved. When I got to Gombe in 1960, you could go all the way along the shore of Lake Tanganyika, the eastern shore, and it was chimpanzee habitat all the way. Just some clearings, there was a couple of towns and some villages. You could climb up the hills and look away from the lake to the east, chimp habitat, as far as you could see. And then in the early 90s, I knew there was deforestation going on, but when I flew in a small plane over that whole area, it was utterly shocking. The hills were devastated. There were clearly too many people living there for the land to support. The farmland was overused. The trees had all gone. Farmers were trying to cultivate really ridiculous steep slopes, soil erosion, all the rest of it. So the question, how can we even try and save the chimpanzees while people are struggling to survive? So that led to our Take Care program, TACARE. And that's a program which is involving now 24 villages. It was started by one project manager, George Strunden, who picked an incredible team of Tanzanians. They went into the villages, no white faces, and sat down and talked in the African way. What can we do which would make your lives better? And of course, they didn't care about conservation then. They cared about health and education for their kids. So that's where we began. And then gradually talk to them about the kind of things that we hoped that this program could do, better farming methods, ways of reclaiming the overused farmland, working with groups of women to improve their lives through microcredit, tiny loans that they would pay back and then get a bigger one, education, scholarships for girls, working with women, because all over the world it's been shown that as women's education increases, family size drops. And so we provide family planning information and also HIV/AIDS education. And it took a while, but trust gained, trend towards smaller family size. And now, the last piece in this puzzle was finding up in the high hills above Gombe really good coffee. They couldn't get a good price, there were no proper roads. So persuading some of the big specialty coffee roasters, particularly Green Mountain coffee roasters, to come in, yeah, it's really good coffee, buy some, create a specialty brand, and give the farmers really good money. As a result of that, there is so much goodwill for our Take Care program that the villagers have sat down with our GPS specialist, satellite imagery, Lillian Pintea, and they have put the 10% of their land that the government requires set aside for conservation now, in such a way that it's forming a buffer between the tiny 30 square mile Gombe National Park and the villagers, and will allow the chimps who were trapped in this little oasis of forest to mingle, we hope, with other remnant groups. So it's a success all round. It's helped the people, it's helped the chimpanzees, and it's...
In that sense, I guess another way to say it is you actually can put Humpty Dumpty back together again if you want to reconnect a fragmented habitat.
Well, yes, because
there's a template there that you could use elsewhere.
Yes, I just stood there about 3 months ago. I stood there with our project leader, Manuel Matiti, and looked over the previously bare hills behind Gombe at this, and the trees are now about 20 foot high. It's very resilient. Nature's very resilient. So now we are trying to replicate this around other wilderness areas. And, you know, it would work anywhere. Australia, China, India. And so hopefully USAID loves it. They sent 71 of their top project managers to Kigoma to see how it's done. And it's one of the examples I use in this book.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more later about the ways that you might want to, about how one goes about getting people to invest in this point of view. Obviously, reading the book would be a start, but I want to know why it is that you invested in it. I mean, what you write about reading Tarzan books, reading Dr. Dolittle. I find it difficult to think of you as Jane, even though you are Jane. You would have been a different kind of Jane, I think. But where did your passion
I was very
come from?
jealous of that stupid Jane.
How so?
Because I wanted to be Tarzan's mate myself.
Oh, well, I think.
But anyway, you know, from the time I was born, apparently, I was only interested in animals. Animals, 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 books about animals. 11 years old, I'm going to go to Africa, live with animals and write books about them at a time when, as you've already said, girls didn't do that sort of thing. World War II was raging. We didn't have enough money even for a bicycle, let alone a car. This is why I never went to university. We couldn't afford it. But I had an amazing mother. And she would say, if you really want something and you work hard and you never give up, you find a way. Whereas everybody else was laughing at me. Yeah. So it was animals, animals, animals. It was never just chimpanzees. That landed in my lap because I met Louis Leakey, and he had for a long time, he says, been looking for someone to try and throw some light on the behavior of our closest relatives in the wild, which he felt might help him to kind of guess how early humans might have behaved, because that was his interest. So the chimps were, I think, a really fortunate thing for me because they're so like us. And so it really helped people to see that there isn't a sharp line dividing us from the other animals. And I think that's benefited other animals too.
After we take a break, we'll come back and talk about this some more.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
Okay, welcome back to Afterwards. We're speaking with Jane Goodall about her new book, Hope for Animals and Their World. And I would like to talk a little bit about children and nature, because in this country there's mounting evidence that kids don't play outside anymore the way they used to. I have 3 young boys. They play outside a lot, but mostly they play on fields surrounded by parents. They don't crawl around in the stream bed. I don't know of anybody in my neighborhood that has a tree house, and only one of them likes animals in a significant way. And there is a concern that academics in this country have, that conservationists in this country have, that because that is happening, we will be raising a generation that will be less interested in saving some of these animals that you write about in this book. I mean, have you heard about this phenomenon? Does it happen outside of the United States?
Absolutely.
And what do we do? What do you do about it?
All across Europe, same thing in the UK. And it goes even deeper than concerns about conservation. It's been shown that young children need nature for healthy psychological development. You know, trees and flowers and things like that are really important. They did a study in Chicago where they took 2 areas of high crime. In one area they used all the empty vacant lots, they made it green, they put window boxes, they did everything they could to green it. The other one they left, and the rate of crime dropped significantly in the area which they made green. So this is why, you know, people say to me, well, why have you left the chimpanzees? Why are you working with children so much in our Roots and Shoots program? So for 2 reasons. One is I have grandchildren. They're fine, they're in Tanzania. They play like children outside. And my son was raised in Tanzania, he did too. But I see so many of the people I know in the US and Europe who are just as you described, that kids do not play out in the wild.
You just mentioned the Roots and Shoots program. Tell me a little bit more about that. That's a global program.
Yes.
Designed to what? Get kids to invest in nature. Is
well,
that
it's
a good way to summarize it?
It's a bit more than that.
Yes.
It's a symbolic name. If you imagine a small seed, let's take an acorn. We all know an acorn. It's going to grow into a big oak tree. And when it starts to grow, there are these little tiny roots and shoot, and it looks so weak, and yet the life force in that seed is such that to reach the water, those roots can work through boulders and eventually push them aside, and that little shoot to reach the sunlight can work through crevices in a brick wall and eventually knock it down. So if we take the boulders on the wall to represent all the ills that we humans have inflicted on the planet, environmentally and socially, this is hope. Hundreds and thousands of young people around the world can break through and make this a better world for all living things. Its main message, each one of us makes a difference every single day. We impact the world around us, and we have a choice. And every group, it's hands-on, roll up your sleeves, get out there. Every group chooses 3 different kinds of project. One to help people, one to help animals, and that includes domestic animals, and one to help the environment we all share. And it's preschool all the way through university. It's getting more and more adult groups, like the staff of a big corporation, senior citizen places. It's in 111 countries. It's in every US state. And it's right across mainland China, for example, and growing fast in India and Australia. Slowly in Europe, but it is growing there.
I'm afraid that it is not just children who don't know what's out there. We live in a world now where wild places are isolated from the places where we all live.
Yep,
most
that's right.
of us. And,
except that we're urban sprawling our way deeper and deeper
yes.
into those last wild places, which is a total nightmare.
Yes, and I think as a result, it's just not the same thing to see it on TV or even in an IMAX theater. And so let me ask you this question. If you could take, you know, the world that lives in the suburbs to a place where they could have the kind of epiphany that turns someone into a field biologist, that makes someone want to take their mother into the jungle to look at chimpanzees, where would you take them? How do you show them?
I've done it, and I think to start with, it's really important that they don't go anywhere too exotic, but to go somewhere that's lovely, safe, you know, not too filled with dangers, but where they can hear the birds singing, where there are little clear streams, and they can see the fish and maybe some frogs, and perhaps there are some deer there, that kind of place. So they're not going to feel threatened. And even that will threaten some young people. They're afraid of silence. They're afraid of the rustles of the night. But, you know, we have taken young people into this kind of environment and seen the change. I know many people who take children out into this kind of environment, and it's really making a change.
It has worked for me to take my children out into stretches of forest and lay down on our backs and try to hear the wind coming through the tops of the trees. That I've always thought that that's about my favorite sound in the world.
It's wonderful.
But when I try to think about some of the, you know, the far more amazing sights that the people in this book have seen, it's almost it's a difficult thing to get across to people who have not spent much time in a natural place, that such miracles can even exist, or even to explain the nature of those miracles. I was very lucky once. When I was a child, I lived in a part of California that was near the California Condor sanctuary. And at one point in my life, I was standing on the edge of a cliff where 2 prairie falcons chased a condor down to the bottom of the cliff, and I hadn't seen it yet, and it flew straight up 15 feet in front of me, right above me, with its wings spread, making this roaring sound. And that's why I do what I do today. That was it. And I tremble to think what will be lost if ways aren't found to get across a better definition of what it is that is at stake here, of what John Muir used to call, I think, the giant sequoias the face of God. And those are the moments when you see the face of God. I mean, do you have moments like that you will never forget? I would imagine that one of them might have been the time when you saw the chimpanzee pick up what was a tool at a time when tool was thought to be the province of humans.
Well, that was pretty exciting, but my epiphany, which linked me to animals forever, happened much earlier. In fact, I was only 4.5 years old, and we went to stay in the country. We lived in the city. We were an urban family. And so I was given a job to help collect the hens' eggs. And I was putting these eggs into my little basket. The hens were free in those days. They were not battery farms back then. And I could think where the egg came from the hen. Where was the hole big enough for an egg to come out? So I ended up hiding in a hen house. And I apparently hid there for over 4 hours. Nobody knew where I was. But I saw an egg laid. And I can never forget that. So I'm always telling young people, they say, well, everything's been seen and everything's been discovered and there's no fun anymore. And I say, nothing can take away from you your own experience of seeing something for yourself for the first time. Even if it's been seen 1,000,000 times before, you've seen it. It was your patience, your determination. And so because the world is as it is today, I think it's really important that we realize that even something like a domestic chicken can turn a child on, and that starts the curiosity that then is going to reach out to some of these more remote places. And this is why I work so much of my time now to grow this youth program, because, you know, I could kill myself trying to save chimps and their forests, and somebody else could kill themselves trying to save California condors or black-footed ferrets. But if we're not raising new generations to do a better job of caring for them than we've done, then our work is useless.
I do have I did have one or two moments while reading this book when I found myself wondering whether that this was a set of prescriptions that might not be enough to save some of the most precious species on the planet. In particular, the tiger, for instance, which is in a terrible state.
And the
right
polar
now.
bear now.
Yeah, and the polar bear. But I mean, are there lessons learned that you learned in these case studies that you could apply on that broader scale? I mean, the tiger there may be as few as 2,000 tigers left in all the wild in all of its former range now, and it's my personal nightmare to have to say to my kids, you know, there used to be these amazing animals that walked around in the jungles in India. And
it's my nightmare too.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I think there's no question we will lose more. We can't save them all. We won't save them all. We don't have the political will or the money. But to come to your tiger, maybe that's an easier problem than polar bears, I'm not sure. But the only way I see, and I talk about it when I go to India, is something like the Take Care program. So, because, you know, the last tigers are going by people who are desperately poor, and they're going in there because they can sell the tiger parts or something like that. And if we could involve them in the kind of Take Care program and give them other ways of finding their livelihood and bring some money in through maybe carbon credit for avoided deforestation, for example. But, you know, whether that will save the tiger or not, I don't know. I don't know if the political will be there.
We haven't addressed the even larger problems, I suppose, that are addressed by climate change. I suppose it's possible to look at climate change as a reason to accelerate in every possible way the study of these species so that we can understand how these ecosystems function, so that we can understand what can survive where. I mean, I know that we've learned a huge amount in the last 50 years.
There's lots more
but it strikes me that there's always this kind of chart that you can draw of the amount that we know about a certain species and the decline of the species, and you want those two lines to cross before they meet the third line, that is extinction.
Well, unfortunately, there are other lines intersecting here, which is making it very complicated. Yes. Like, you know, what are we going to do about saving the environment? That line's going to cross. And, you know, how many more people will get born? That line's going to cross. But, you know, I was just in Greenland. I stood with some Inuit elders, seeing these huge slabs of ice crack off and crash down where never, ever used the ice to melt. And now there's a raging torrent of melted ice. There wasn't even a trickle 30 years ago. It never melted. This is they call it the big ice, and it goes up to the ice cap. And I came away, you know, with this sense of, like, this is a wake-up call. We have to do everything we can to slow down climate change. We can't stop it. We can't halt it in its tracks. We can't suddenly turn it around any more than a huge ship which is full steam ahead, can be turned. It's going to take time for the thing to change course. But we just have to do everything we can. And one way is saving tropical forests to trap all the carbon there.
And in the face of all of this, it's quite impressive. You remain optimistic. It's an interesting thing for me to try to figure out what form of optimism this is, whether it's bullheaded optimism, whether it's Mike Soule, an ecologist, used to say that in conservation biology, it is necessary to be optimistic. But I think it's something more than that. I think that you really do believe that there is a way to do these things. To steal a phrase from our current president, it's a yes we can situation.
Well, you know, things like, I mean, it may not always have been done in the right way, but the lowest plateau in China, that's an area as big as France, I think. And it was the most utterly degraded ecosystem in the world. It was completely barren. And well, this was a big project. This was the World Bank getting together with the Chinese government. And, you know, all these people were told, you know, you're going to plant trees. And this friend of mine who filmed it every year, he's filmed it now 15 years, and has made a film called Earth's Hope. He interviewed some of the farmers in the early days, and they said, well, this is ridiculous. You know, they tell us to plant trees, so we have to plant them, but it's stupid. But now the trees have grown, and of course too much fertilizer, chemical stuff was used. But there are other examples in the book, like Sudbury, where it was done in a more gentle way, and it was the will of the people to turn this devastated area, which the nickel mining had reduced to just black rock, and everything had gone, and the people were living in horrible situation. And now, go there and have a look. It's beautiful. So we can turn it around, and I think, you know, the big underlying problem is numbers of people. That's huge, and we are taking away the wilderness piece by piece by piece, because there's so many of us. So that's something that, you know, we have to address. And on the one hand, you get massive destruction of the environment through poverty, and on the other hand, you get massive destruction of the environment through our unsustainable lifestyles. So those three things, if we can find ways to address them, and they're very tough, but they can be done in pieces. You can't do the whole thing, but we know we can reduce poverty. We know that that can help the environment. We know that that in turn can bring animal species back. So it is possible.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
It's because we try and think so big that it becomes so impossible. But take pieces and have people passionate enough to fight the good fight for their peace. More of those people, more and more and more of those people. That's what that's supposed to, you know, young biologists, don't give up. Go out there, you do your bit. See, it's possible.
The phrase never give up appears frequently in this book. I think I understand more about why now. I wanted to ask how the chimpanzees in Tanzania are doing these days, 50 years later.
They're not doing, as a species, they're not doing well. There were probably way over 1 million when I began, stretched over 25 nations. They're now in 21 nations. There's, you know, maximum 300,000, probably less. And their forests are going really fast, many of them, like at Gombe, in these small fragmented patches. And we shall lose many more. But on the other hand, there are large areas set aside for conservation. The avoided deforestation is something I feel very passionate about. Ecotourism done in the right way, you have to find a way to give African governments an incentive, because at the moment China can go in with lots of money and build dams and roads in return for taking out, well, basically the African children's future. So we have to be able to come up with something that's as attractive, and to pay people not to cut their forest down is one way. The tourism thing, it does work, but it's not big amounts of money straight away. It's just small amounts of money, but over the long term.
I bet 50 years ago, it was impossible to imagine this world. You never would have guessed. Who would have guessed? And so it may not be fair to ask you to try and predict where we might be 50 years from now if we were to get things right, or where
there's too many imponderables. I mean, if you take all the scientists who worked on global warming and the thawing of ice, and they were wrong. It's actually happening faster than they said. So it's very hard. I wouldn't even try to predict the future. But my goal is to get a critical mass of young people going out, taking up responsible positions in the adult world, sharing a philosophy, understanding that although we need some money to live, we shouldn't live for money, that money, raising money, getting lots of money, acquiring stuff, we need a different value set. And if we can get a critical mass of young people thinking that way, then the future is much brighter. And oddly enough, I think this economic downturn, certainly in some parts of the world, is having just that effect. People are thinking about their priorities, and that, if you still have enough money in your bank to live a decent life, and you were spending all your time getting more and more and more money and very little time for your family, and suddenly you lose most of it, was it worth it? I know that this is the way of thinking in Hong Kong and some parts of China. I've met people, Singapore, who are beginning to think differently.
Is it fair, though, to say that, on the basis of this book, it seemed to me that certain positive futures, it's not time.
Yeah.
There are a lot of possibilities, that there's a lot of directions that we could go.
Yeah, there may be some, heaven forbid, but there could be a plague-like effect. We could lose hundreds of thousands of people. It's always being predicted with these superbugs, because we misuse antibiotics, because we keep animals in these awful conditions for intensive farming, so we have to feed them antibiotics regularly to keep them alive, so the bugs are building up resistance. It's out in the food chain, and people have already died from a scratch because there wasn't a strong enough antibiotic. So we don't know what's going to happen, and we've got to be prepared for it to turn around in the favor of the environment and the animals and the future of our own great-grandchildren.
I want to go back to a more respectful form of the Jane question that we talked about. That's related to the fact that you were one of the first women in your field, and now it's a field that in which women are much more involved and much more accomplished, and it appears to be wide open in that respect. And how do you feel about that? You are a hero to many field biologists who happen to be female that I know, and
well, it's exciting, because I have letters from young women who grew up, so places like China, India, where women certainly didn't do this kind of thing. And they got hold of my book, usually In the Shadow of Man, and they wrote to me and said, well, I suddenly realized if you could do it, I can do it too. And this is, it's a very good feeling. And I know from the number of young women who've said, you really helped me to stand firm and go in the direction that I wanted to go, because after I read Shadow of Man.
Well, is there... You have never met my children, but would you like to give them any advice on what they ought to do to do their part to make some of these dreams come true? These are all unfinished stories here. There are threats to each of the species that are identified. But I want to know if there is a message that you would like to send to the next generation, as represented by Daniel, Jonah, and Eli Nielsen.
Absolutely. I give this message all the time. And it's basically that, every one of us, not just the young people, but all of us have to remember that each day we actually do make a difference. It's very hard to realize you feel small and insignificant, and the choices you make, how can they possibly make any difference? But in fact, when enough people make small choices, like what you buy, what you eat, what you wear, where did it come from? Did it involve animal suffering or child slave labor or sweatshops? Did it involve use of lots of pesticides? Did it destroy land to create it? How far has it come? How many air miles has your food traveled? You know, if people start thinking about the consequences of their choices, they do start making change. And kids are really good at this. I mean, they become very passionate, and they drive their parents nuts because they want to know where all the food came from and why did you buy this one? We make it locally. And my sister's grandson, when he was 5, would go all around the store and he'd say, you mustn't buy that, it's got pesticide in it, and you mustn't buy this, it's poisonous, in a very loud, piercing voice.
And you don't buy it, do you?
No, exactly. You don't buy it if it's poison, do you?
I actually think that's a perfect note to end on, and I want to thank you for joining us and tell you that you're one of my heroes as well. I know that that's not a completely neutral statement from someone interviewing a book author, but I am, on behalf of everyone, I'm grateful to you for what you've done, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Just as I'm grateful to all the heroes who shared their knowledge, passion, and love with me.